Awesome. Well, we're going to continue our series in Nehemiah, and we are going to open looking at a passage in Nehemiah chapter 4. So if you have your Bibles, Nehemiah 4. If you don't, it's going to be put on the screen in the New King James Version. That's what I'll be reading from for this evening. We'll be looking at verses 1 through 6. Nehemiah 4, 1 through 6. And here's what it says. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned?" Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, "Whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they have provoked you to anger before the builders." So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Tonight, we're going to focus in on the voice of Sanballat. And really, we want to talk about recognizing and being able to resist the enemy's tactics during a season of rebuilding. When we're looking at the world that we live in, we need to understand that two things are true at all times. There is a physical world and there is a spiritual world. And these two things exist within each other. Now, many times we who are part of this physical realm do not always get to see behind the curtain of what's necessarily happening in the spiritual realm. Sometimes it's granted to us a measure of sight or vision or understanding about what might be happening in that world, but it's not as if it's superimposed like a filter that sits over our eyes so that we can see angels simply walking around, demons carrying on. We don't necessarily have the ability to see with our natural eyes what is happening in the spirit. But you must recognize that there is a battle, a war, a tactic that is always moving and manifesting itself in this world. And sometimes you just feel it. Have you ever, for example, walked into a room and you're sitting among people and things seem normal, but you've got a sense something's not. And you can't put your finger on what that is. But you just know it's bothering your spirit, and you don't necessarily know why. So too, have you ever been in a room and you suddenly have the awareness, I'm not alone here, even if you see no other human being present with you. There's an entire spiritual realm, and that realm is just as organized as our natural. And that's something that we need to understand, because we're not just going against an enemy who for thousands of years has not learned how to do his stuff. We're going against an enemy who has a complete war plan. Now, we understand the end of everything is that he's not going to win, but that does not mean that he isn't trying with all of his might to bring someone down with him. The whole point of all of this is that the enemy understands he isn't going to win. He is keenly aware, but what he would love is for God to win a little less. That's what he would love, for God to win just a little bit less by using you and I as the tools to break God's heart, by stealing us away from him. That is the only way he can transact, if you will, a win. What does this have to do with Nehemiah? It has everything to do with Nehemiah, because today we're going to explore what happens when we begin to rebuild something, and how does the enemy engage his tactics and his strategies against that? Because if we are forewarned, we are absolutely forearmed. And I want to make sure when we walk out of here, some of the things that we might have been struggling with that were kind of the silent thoughts that we didn't give voice to, and some of the perhaps frustrations or anxieties that we've been living through and we didn't really know what that source was. I want to expose all of that. So when you walk out of here, you say to yourself, hey, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Now I see you in the room. I felt you, and I didn't know what I was warring against, but now I see you and I've identified you, and now that you're identified, I can take you down. So we're going to get into that. First thing to know is that whenever God begins rebuilding something, there are three things that are going to happen without question. Number one, the enemy is going to start speaking. He is going to start chattering. He is going to give voice to things in your life, in your ear, in your spirit, and he is going to chatter with his lies. He is going to chatter to break you down, to ruin your understanding of self and God. Number two, opposition is going to rise. That opposition is going to take many different forms. But know that there are going to be things that are dead set against you being able to advance. The third thing is that discouragement is going to follow. It's like a progression. He begins to speak, he begins to thwart, he begins to discourage you from moving forward. That's the progression of what he wants to do. I'm going to talk them out of it. I'm going to work things in their path that provides enough of a blocker that it slows them down. And then I'm going to try and get them on a different path than this. Nehemiah was rebuilding more than a wall. He was rebuilding an identity. He was rebuilding worship. He was rebuilding unity, security, and covenant purpose. This was meaningful. This was weighty. And everything that he was endeavoring to rebuild was absolutely necessary. But before the enemy attacks physically, he attacks verbally through Sanballat. Sanballat asks 5 questions. And we're going to examine each of the 5 questions and what they potentially mean to us as a church and as individuals within the church. The goal of the enemy was not merely to just stop construction. His goal was to break their spirit. And I don't know if you've ever experienced your spirit being broken. I have. I've had moments where my spirit was utterly dashed. There is a heaviness, a weight to when your spirit is broken that makes it really hard to see past. If he can break our spirit, he can break our sense of purpose. Let's talk about these. Number one, the first question he asks is, what are these feeble Jews doing? Okay. This is a mockery. And it's specifically a mockery of their perceived weakness. Sanballat wanted them to focus on the following things. He wanted them to focus on what they lacked. He wanted them to focus on what they used to be, the bygone era, the golden days. Be very careful when your mind starts going to the golden days, because often that hyperfixation on what you once had or how things once looked can sometimes take the shine off of the present moment that God's still in. In this particular case, he wanted them to understand how broken they looked, how incapable they seemed. The enemy always attacks identity. And if you're a note taker, this is important. The enemy always attacks identity before he attacks effectiveness. He will tear down identity first, long before he even gets into a discussion with you about how well you're doing. He first wants you to know how not well you are. He'll come and he'll whisper, he'll tell you you're too small. You're too damaged. Your best years are behind you. You don't have enough people. You don't have enough money. You don't have enough talent. He wants the church to define itself by limitation instead of calling. He always wants us to define ourselves by limitation instead of calling. How many people in this room, just by a show of hand, have ever had those moments where you feel like you are too insignificant to be noticed in the grander plan of God. How many of us? Everybody in the room. It is his primary tactic. His primary tactic is to attack your identity. Let me give you biblical responses if you want to jot these down. Zechariah 4 and 10. The first thing I want you to know is that you never, ever have to despise or slant your eyes sideways at any small beginning. And when I say small beginning, there is no time period that defines what a beginning is. Some things last for extended periods as development is happening. Not every seed that's cast into the ground grows at the same rate. There are some things that take a long time for root systems to be built before anything can sprout above ground. And there are reasons for that, because if those root systems are not deeply in place, what comes up is not going to be sustainable. Who is to determine how long something has to be rooted before it shows? God alone. God alone knows when it's sufficient for something to be shown. God alone knows when there's enough traction and when there's enough growth and when those root systems have dug down enough to be able to have a supply of water at all times. Only God knows that. It is not for us to allow the enemy to speak to us and say, this is small and it's insignificant and it has no power behind it because of the mere size of it. No. Don't let him come at you with that tactic when we're in a growth strategy. That growth is not always just numerical. Right. That growth can be a lot of things. Let me tell you, don't ever discount when people come into this church the spiritual and emotional growth that is happening in them. That is growth. If somebody comes in this room and they sit on the pew on day 1 and they feel as if they are a nothing and a nobody, but on week 2, it's I'm a nothing and a nobody, but these people are nice to me. And week 3 is I'm a nothing and a nobody, but these people are nice to me and I feel comfortable around them. I'm a nothing and a nobody and these people are nice to me and I feel comfortable around them. Maybe I'll talk to them. Understand, that is growth. That's angry making for the devil. Because he understands those people are inching towards purpose. And it may take a while before they can flip the script on nothing and nobody, but the moment they do, he's out. But by increments, there's motion. By increments, there's movement. Do not despise ever small beginnings. 2 Corinthians 12 and 9, it says, my strength, it's made perfect, whole, lacking in nothing, mature. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Well, that's mind goop right there. How is strength somehow made perfect or whole in weakness? And the answer is very simple. It's the addition of God in all that I am so that he can receive glory through the things in me that might seem insignificant or incomplete. And he comes in with the master stroke and is able to take me to the next level. And there I am in strength that I didn't self-generate. There is nothing greater than the strength that we don't self-generate, because every human being, myself included, has a limit. There's a drop-off point. There's a point where I can go and then I can't go any further. I get to the end of myself. I have nothing else to bring to the table. If I continue walking out, I might as well be a person walking on water. There's nothing that should be sustaining me, but look at me, I'm being held up. And that's the master's hand. That's the master's influence. God, he specializes in using what looks feeble. God is not moving a church forward because it's impressive. He's moving it forward because he's with it. He's in it. There is nothing that you and I have to do in ourselves to impress God to use us and join with us in this work. We simply must be available and honest and truthful before him. He loves that. A broken and a contrite heart and spirit. What does it say in the scripture? He doesn't despise it. He doesn't turn from that. That's exactly what he's looking for. If you feel broken, awesome. If you feel as if there are things that right now you're saying, oh, I feel as human as I've ever felt, that's okay. God is looking at that as a personal invitation to step in with spiritual power that fortifies you and allows you to still build some walls. There's a key that I just want you to take from that first question. If you're a note taker, write it down. Weakness does not disqualify God's work. Weakness does not disqualify God's work. Weakness is the stage where God displays his power. It doesn't disqualify it. It sets the stage for his power. Second question. Will they fortify themselves? Will they fortify themselves? This is the attack on sustainability. Sanballat is essentially saying this won't last. Have you ever had a moment in your life where you're doing the work of God and you say to yourself, I just don't understand how this lasts. I don't know how this goes on forever. I don't know how this lasts until he comes. I'm not sure how that happens. This is a hard thing, because when you're in a stage of rebuilding or pivoting or just taking things to the next level as God is leading, this question from the enemy it's just insidious. Because the enemy loves to convince rebuilding churches that, number one, any momentum they have is temporary, that enthusiasm is going to fade, and that healthy growth is impossible. He loves to tell us that. Yeah, it's going to start out in like a cool and excited direction, but eventually, there's the drop-off. He loves to ask, are they actually going to fortify themselves? Like, are they going to be able to sustain what they've started? Is this ball is going to start rolling, but is it really something that's rolling downhill and is going to pick up any kind of speed? Or is this something that you just kind of kicked a little bit and it's on a flat surface and it's just going to run out of that momentum and slip right back into an... The enemy tells us that people are going to leave, that excitement is not going to survive, that the church might collapse, or it'll never become stable. You'll never have enough to be able to keep this chugging. It's fear-based ministry instead of faith-based ministry. If we look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 18, Jesus says it this way. He says, I will build my church. I mean, that's a declarative. Who's going to build the church? Whose church is it? We are actually, and I will say something that might seem a little provocative in saying it, but it is nevertheless the truth. God's church is going to be built in spite of us. It's going to be built in spite of us. If you and I want to opt in, that's awesome. That's best. We want that. That's great. But if you choose not to occupy the seat that you're currently occupying and you decide to take a different path that leads you away from God, let me just tell you, this church of God's will continue to exist, and somebody hungry will come and sit in your spot. Because it's not built on you. And it's not built on me. My husband and I may be here right now, but you know what? If the Lord tarries 100 years from now, we're not the ones who are going to be here. It should still be here. And the reason it should still be here is because we have ceded all of the power to him and say, build your church. Because that's your business. You're building it. I want to be involved in my Father's business. I want to be a participant in my Father's business. I want to help my Father's business to flourish. I want to be active in my Father's business because I want to be a good steward of every resource he's ever given me. Will I fortify myself? You bet I will. I will fortify myself because I make a choice on who I am and what I desire to be in him. I make that choice to agree. I make that choice to submit. If I choose not to make that choice, he has already declared he will still build his church. And he goes so far as to say, and this is interesting, because because I don't know that we always think of it in these terms. But Jesus goes on to say, and the gates of hell will what? Not prevail against it. Now, I want you to take that imagery for a moment. When you think of the sentence, the gates of hell will not prevail against it, often people tend to have this image that the gates of hell are standing opposed to us, and it's not going to overtake us. That's not going to overtake us. The church is going to just be able to fight against all that. And here's what I want to flip the script on as far as that language in your mind. That is not an image of the gates of hell coming up against you. That's an image of those gates can't prevail against your efforts. You go to those gates and you storm them. It has no power to withhold you. Those gates that Jesus is talking about when he says, I'm going to build my church. And not even the gates that are of the place in which those who unfortunately, we think of hell, we think of that place of torment, that place. Let me tell you something. If I can just step out of the imagery a little bit, right? So what I'm about to say here is just more poetic, if I will. Let me take a liberty for a moment. There are a lot of people whose reality already is hellish. There are a lot of people who are living in their own personal hellscape in life. There are a lot of people who are bound and broken. And the enemy has been feasting on them for years. They are already behind gates. They are already imprisoned by a thing. They don't necessarily understand in fullness what that thing is that they've been struggling against, but they feel like they're captors and they can't get out. I will build my church. And that place has gates, but you have the power to open them. You have the power to open those places in which people are struggling. You have the power to be able to come into those places and bring light into dark spaces where there are captives. It's important for us to understand nothing beats his church because nothing beats him. And he's the author of his church. He is the head of his church. Amen. Jesus didn't say that we would sustain it by ourselves. He said he would build it himself. The early church in the book of Acts, when you take a look at that church, it's a church that survives persecution. It's a church that survives imprisonment. It's a church that survives famine. It's a church that survives martyrdom. Some of them, unfortunately, were run right through, and their stories ended, but it kept going forward with those who still remained. It was a church that survived government opposition, and why did all that happen? It's because what God builds can absolutely endure pressure. The church is sustained by his presence, not by human strength. Take that, Sanballat, with your question of whether we fortify ourselves. You don't know who you're messing with. He's the one who fortifies. Do you think that he can be ousted or toppled? The answer is a resounding no. He asked a third question, will they offer sacrifices? Now, this is the attack on worship and spiritual passion. Worship and spiritual passion. This is a question that mocks their devotion. Sanballat understood something very important. And that very important thing that he understood is that if he could disconnect rebuilding from worship, the work would become mechanical and exhausting. Let me just stress that again. If he could disconnect the purpose of the space in the hearts of the people by questioning how they would use it, then the work that they would do would become mechanical, purposeless. If it is simply a matter of, I come to church on Sunday and I lead worship because songs have to be sung, because that's what you have to do for a worship service. We wouldn't call it a worship service unless there was an aspect of worship, so let me pick some songs. If you come to church and it's, well, I come to church and I'm just thinking of things that we already have roles in. I'll mention something that Joanne does. What if for her it's, I will come to church because I have to clean the building because, like it's got to be cleaned, right? What if he approached it as, I have to come up with a sermon for Sunday because, somebody's got to hear something. When you disconnect what you're really doing when the work is going on, when you disconnect the purpose of why you do what you do, then the work becomes mechanical and the work becomes exhausting. If you've ever been involved in ministry, you know that burnout is a possibility. And you know that that burnout is usually at the point in which things become exhausting, often because we get into our own heads. And we get into our heads because we're not seeing the results that we necessarily want to see, and we can't see the point to it all readily. Where's the advancement? Where are the success metrics here? Where is it? And when we let ourselves get to that space, we lose heart. The church is meant to thrive, but the enemy wants this. He wants it to lose prayer. The enemy desperately wants us to lose prayer. Because let me tell you something, there is nothing more sacred than the activity of communing with God. You commune with God. You meet him face to face in a space that is 100% the property of you and him. And in that space, there is empowerment. There's that intimacy of him feeding you. There's that intimacy of you praising, worshiping, and yielding to him. There's something sacred about that. He wants churches to lose prayer. He wants them to lose hunger. He wants them to lose real worship, not just singing songs. Never come in here and just blankly stare at the screen and sing a song. It should be an anthem of praise when you consider what he's done. The things that he's done are beyond compare. The things that he's done are mind-blowing if you let them be. It's not humdrum. And that deserves a thank you. We often teach our kids, when they come and snatch the gift out of somebody's hand who's extending it. What do you say? How many of the parents in the room have had to remind their kids, what do you say? Thank you, right? But there's that reality of, yes, when somebody has spent currency to give you something that they didn't owe you just because they wanted to create joy for you, there should be not just receiving, but joyful receiving and grateful receiving. I've received a lot. I've received a lot from God. And sometimes, I will tell you more often than not actually, sometimes the things that I've received from God came through the hands of people that he impressed upon to bless me, to say something kind to me, to embrace me, to check in on me. Sister Lion is always checking in on me. You know what that feels like when I've lived in a lot of silence? It's a blessing of God. So I say thank you to him, but I say thank you to her, both. Because they are both a part of that. I have to bring to mind those things because I don't want us to become organizational and not spiritual. I don't want us to be the well-oiled machine that runs all of its gears for it does not know what. Satan tries to convince churches that prayer doesn't matter. Just focus on the programs. Focus on the programs. Worship is just emotionalism. You don't need that for spiritual passion. It's going to try and come up with anything. That voice is always egging. But you know what? A healthy rebuilding is always going to require sacrifice. Always. It's got to cost us something. I think of David who said, I'm not going to offer God something that doesn't cost me anything. I'm not doing that. Oh no, it's got to cost me something. Because he understood that that's the only way I really have skin in this game. I have skin in the game when it costs me something too. I'll just a little sidestep and we'll get right back to this, but covenant, right? This concept of covenant, we see this appear with Abraham in the Bible. And covenant, just as a word, is based on the idea of blood pact. It's literally the word that's used. It's something that culturally would have been understood by Abram in his day. This blood pact meant I have to put something into this and you have to put something into it, and it has to essentially cut both ways. It's got to harm us both help us both. This agreement means that something comes from me that is essential and necessary, my blood, and something comes from you. In the case of God and Abraham, the cut, if you will, for Abraham was circumcision, and that ended up being the thing that people did, the menfolk did, to opt into that covenant. If they didn't opt into that covenant quite literally with their blood pact, it was null and void. They weren't a part of it. What he couldn't have seen that would come down the line is that the ultimate cut on the other side would happen in the body of Jesus Christ, who would fulfill the pact once and for all and bring us all into that promise, right? But this idea of covenant is sacred in the sight of God. And so when we are going to enter into covenant with God, we need to understand that covenant equals cost. Covenant always equals cost, and the cost is always on both sides of the covenant. If both parties are in agreement, both parties pay. God always pays his part. I want to endeavor to be a person who always pays mine. And I don't want it to be ritual, and I don't want it to be rote. I want it to be real and come from a pure place in my heart where I'm really saying, you know what, God, I see you. I recognize what you've done. Let me give back. And if that costs prayer, if that costs worship, if that whatever that cost is, it's important to give that. Romans 12:1 says you present your bodies as a living sacrifice. It talks about that being minimum service. Paul and Silas, they worshipped in the prison when we're looking at Acts chapter 16. They worshipped, sitting there imprisoned. Who knows how horrible the conditions might have been. And yet there they are, finding a song in the midst of it. And it was because of that song that breakthrough comes. Worship is not the reward we give God after a victory. Worship, prayer, devotion, all of these things are the acts that carry us into victory. Fourth question. Will they complete it in a day? I don't even know why this was a question on the table. Of course not. Okay, this is a very big project. No, it's not going to be completed like that. But here he is. Will they complete it in a day? The attack on patience. The attack on patience. This is sarcasm. It's aimed to discourage their endurance. The enemy wants believers to become frustrated with the process. How does this apply to us? He's going to whisper in our ears, this is taking too long. Nothing's changing. You should be further along by now. Why do you keep trying? Who's ever felt that? 100%. 100%. Impatience is one of the enemy's most effective discouragement tools. But this is what it says in Galatians 6:9. It says, let us not grow weary while doing good. Don't grow weary. If you are doing good, keep doing it. Keep pushing forward. Do not stop now. Hebrews 10:36, it says, you have need of endurance. You have need of it. It's important. You've got to have that stuff in you. Noah built the ark for years before rain ever appeared. Can you imagine building a vessel for conditions you've never seen? And can I tell you something? This church, as it stands right now, just as it stood on the first day that the Lions ever held a service, is still being built for conditions it hasn't seen yet. We must understand that every single day we plod closer to the end of time. And the end of time is something that has some very strong markers to it. It is a season the Bible describes as woeful. It is a season of great questioning and disaster. I do not rightly know that I could predict when our relief is necessarily going to come before that season. arguably for some of our brothers and sisters in other countries, that is not they are not living their best lives right now. They are being martyred, they are being tortured, and they are doing all of that for the cause of Christ. As far as they're concerned, they're in tribulation. They're in persecution. I do not know how long it will be that the church is on this earth in the conditions that it's currently in. But I do know as the day approaches, there is a reality that endurance, he that endures to the end, the same shall be saved, the Bible says. It is required, it is incumbent upon us that if we want to make it to the end, we have to anticipate that there may be less than pleasant things we need to live through to get there. This church was started when it was started. This church exists now. And this church is still developing forward into tougher times than perhaps it had when it first began. It's inevitable. What does the world look like in 5 years? Couldn't tell you. Will the world still be here in 5 years? Not sure. Will the world be here for 5 more minutes? I don't know. This much I know, for as long as it's here, I'm going to keep working. Right. For as long as it's here, I'm going to keep rising to the next level that I can rise to. For as long as it's here, I'm going to keep pulling cotton out of my ears, as they say, and making sure I can hear the voice of God. Because there are going to come a lot of voices that will speak, and they will speak simultaneously, and they will try and crowd out what God is speaking into my life. And if I yield to those voices will be Sanballat to me. I don't want to hear his voice. I don't want to hear his nonsense. I want to focus on the crystal clear voice of God that tells me, I am telling you these things not to make you fear, but so that you have hope that your redemption is drawing nigh. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah, it's difficult. Keep going. Yeah, it doesn't look the way that you expected it to look. Keep going. The last direction I gave you, rinse, repeat. Rinse, repeat. Keep going. Rinse, repeat. God's work is usually slower than our flesh prefers, but it's often deeper than we realize. Question 5. Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish? This is the attack on the past. This is perhaps the cruelest of the questions. Sanballat points at the rubble. And he says, these stones are ruined. The enemy always wants God's people staring at past failures, broken seasons, disappointments. These are the burned stones in our lives. Things that we say to ourselves, oh, and I have many of them in my own life. I should have done that better. Why did I do that? Or why didn't I do that? I've asked myself that question 1,000 times in my life. I've asked myself that question until I made myself crazy. The enemy, he looks at that and he'll say to us in this season of rebuilding, too much damage has been done. You'll never recover. The church won't thrive the way that it has in the past. People may not necessarily trust to come back depending on personalities and whatever. Can I tell you something? I've been praying a prayer since we got here. And it is a prayer I will relentlessly pray. And it doesn't leave my spirit, it moves me. My prayer has been that the lions see their fruit come back. People who have been here that left of their own accord because they took a stupid pill. Because I'm sure we've been in pastoral ministry. We know about it. We understand. We have people where we look back and say, why'd you leave? You didn't have to go. That was nothing. You got yourself all tripped up over your own shoes. Man, come back. I've been praying, God, let them see that, in a sense, playing on this, that there are no burned or ruined stones at all. That everything they ever carved out in their ministry meant something. I've been praying that prayer. And I believe that God answers that kind of prayer. I believe that we are going to see faces just walk into a room and say, whoa, I haven't seen you in a while. Good. Praise God, because God is showing there's nothing that I've ever been involved in that was moot. Everything I've done is for purpose. And there may be moments in which, of our own volition, we step out of agreement with God. But nothing is lost while there's breath. Where there is breath, there is hope. Where there has been seed planted, there is always the potential for a crop to grow. I'm going to tell you something. I remember on the Cape, and, my green thumb is always a subject of, I put it in, don't worry. So my green thumb is always a subject of small mockery in my life. But I will tell you, I remember when we were on the Cape, there were seasons where I threw something in the ground, and it never came up. I threw it at the right time. I followed. My dad he really was trying so hard. My dad would get me the old school printed out Farmer's Almanac. And he would be like, read this. I'm like, okay. All right. Find out what region we're in. Read it. Plant then. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And I would follow that thing. And I can't tell you how many times I put something in and it was supposed to come up at a certain point. I'm still looking at bare ground. And the season ends. And the snows fall. And I'm like, well, that was stupid. Right? And then year 3, I remember I had planted these elephant plants. I forget what you call them, but they're elephant ears, I think, is what they are. They're big, blooming, wonderful, leafy plants. And I wanted them so bad because they look so cool. I'm like, I want these. And I planted them. I put those bulbs in the ground, and it was 3 years later. 3 years later, all of a sudden I walk out, and there it is. And it's like God's just teaching me, timing is not always yours. But your efforts weren't lost. Timing is not always ours, but our efforts are not lost. That voice tries to speak to us, but let me tell you something. Isaiah 61:4 says, they shall rebuild old ruins. They shall. Old ruins will be rebuilt. Joel 2:25, God says, I will restore. God has this capacity to look at burned stones and still see purpose. Damaged does not mean discarded. And can I just say something else that's related? When I say damaged doesn't mean discarded, I also mean us, still in this room. Because there are moments in our lives where our own weak selves, weak hearts, weak minds, weak bodies, all of these things, they war against our sense of usefulness. Damaged is not discarded. God can have any kind of rebuilding process he wants with what looks ruined to everyone else. When I say where there's life, there's hope, I mean you too. If you are still alive, if you are still sitting here, there is more. Period. I don't even have to qualify what that more is. There is simply more. Tobiah comes in and he says, even a fox can knock it down. While this was not a question, this will be our final point for the night. Tobiah's voice, he comes in, even a fox could knock it down. And this is the attack of constant criticism. After Sanballat questions them, Tobiah minimizes their progress. He looks at them and says, come on. And even what you've done, doesn't mean anything. The enemy often will shift from you can't build to what you're building doesn't matter. Critics will always find frailty in early rebuilding stages. But can I tell you, immature walls can become strong walls if you keep building. Everything has to start with a frame long before there's stone. You need frame. You need something that's going to be able to support what comes next. And just because you don't see what is coming next does not mean that the support is invalid. The support is needed. Nehemiah doesn't stop to argue. No, he just prays. He's not going to sit there and qualify nonsense. He's not going to sit there and have a discussion about any of this. It's not worth it. He prays, and then the people keep building. Plain and simple. The next sentence, so we built the wall. And I love that because that's audacity. I like a little audacity. I do. I like audacity when the victim of my audacity is the enemy. Sure do. Yeah, that's exactly what you do. That is the only response. That's your one move, folks. It's to turn around and say, okay, yeah, I've heard you. I've seen what you're up to. I understand the world that exists here that I can't necessarily see, but now I have an understanding of your game plan and how you work and how you move. So, point, counterpoint. I'll keep building. How about that? What do you think of that? I think that's a great idea. And that might be, quite honestly, the most powerful line in the passage that we read in Nehemiah 4. They did not quit. They did not panic. They did not retaliate. They did not obsess over the criticism at all. They didn't bother with any of those things. And the scripture says they did it because the people had a mind to work. The enemy attacks the mind because rebuilding starts there. If he can break your morale, if he can break our unity, if he can break the vision that's about to be imparted on Sunday before it even has a chance to be born, if he can break our expectations, then he can stop the work of the wall before it ever is finished. But if we as a church stay united, if we stay connected to each other, there's strength in bond. If we can stay prayerful and focused, these walls will rise. There's going to be voices. I won't promise you that there won't be. There's going to be questions. There will be discouragement along the way. Because not everything is going to happen the way that we want. Reality, right? Life. 'Tis what it is. But the assignment is the same. Build prayer. Build unity. Build discipleship. Build worship. Build healthy families. Build faith. And do not answer Sanballat. Don't talk to him. He is not worthy of the breath. Don't answer him, because quite honestly, our victories are just going to come because the people of God refuse to stop building.